So, what if you could trick your genes into slowing the aging process and potentially reversing and quite obviously preventing most chronic disease? What if there was a little trick you could do to make that happen? Well, in fact, there's a lot. I'm going to talk about four of them, and they're all what I call epigenetic resets. If you're unfamiliar with epigenetics, there's a couple of videos I have on my channel here, which I'll link to in whatever way the link works. I'm kind of new at that. But once you're kind of aware that when you look at your genes in the sense of gene expression, the possibility of your genes turning on illness, your genes turning on Alzheimer's, your genes moving towards old age more rapidly, more slowly. But when you're thinking of epigenetics, you're actually thinking of about 50,000 enzymes and nutrients and other things that have to surround your genes to pry them apart and put them back together again. And it's actually the epigenetic soup or stew or hopefully, clean environment that's going to keep your genes happy. If that epigenetic environment goes from a nice kind of soup of nutrients and supportive tissues into something more corrosive and destructive, full of inflammation and toxins and stress hormones and stuff, then you're more likely to actually trigger those genes that may carry illness or more rapid aging. So that's the really short version of what epigenetics is about. So I'm going to give you four epigenetic resets to play with. One's going to have to do with water. One's going to have to do with food. One will have to do with a kind of unique kind of exercise. And the last one's going to have to do with a couple of opportunities around fasting. So when you look at the epigenetic reset that's available and free with respect to water is simply to make sure you're getting about 2 liters of water a day, more or less. And the important part, though, is to make sure you're getting that first liter of water within the first 2 hours of your day. And that's fundamentally meant to mirror or mimic something that was a part of human evolutionary past, which is why we call it an epigenetic reset, because you're resetting your genes to behave in ways that they used to a long time ago. Right. And that's one of my big favorite things about the idea of evolutionary medicine, ancestral nutrition, is we're effectively giving our genes a bath in the kind of biochemistry that they've had for most of our evolutionary time. So when it comes to water, take a moment and remember or imagine or, just sort of accept the fact that for most of human evolutionary history, we've been migratory. Hunting, gathering, following game animals around, just wandering around, discovering the world. So if you've never spent a lot of time in the bush, in nature, without a lot of technology, honestly, one of the hardest things you can do is to carry water around. You don't have big things, you don't have wheels, and water sloshes around, so it's noisy, so it makes it harder to hunt. So it's just sort of a natural reflex or adaptation that humans have got into the habit for probably a couple of million years of drinking most of their water in the morning, carrying that around on the inside of their body, and then moving towards the next water source at night. I'm not saying people never carried water around. I'm just trying to make a point because when you look at, say, your liver, and I'm going to do a little pantomime dance for your liver here, your liver all night while you're sleeping is basically trying to take fat-soluble toxins and tissue waste and all the other, it's kind of gross in there. But as long as your liver can take a fat-soluble toxin, turn it into a water-soluble toxin, and I'm going to pretend I'm your liver holding my little toxins out below your stomach first thing in the morning, hoping that millions of years of water is still going to happen, that's actually how the body has adapted to work. So all night, every night, your liver is trying to get ready for that nice big liver bath of water because you need the water to get rid of the water-soluble toxins. So kind of obvious, but the medical impact of doing this every day is just unbelievably profound. In fact, there are some hospitals in the world now who actually make patients follow that protocol. And if a patient refuses to drink their water, they'll actually just put the water in their IV because they're seeing such a reduction in post-operative infections and reductions in post-operative stay and less use of a whole bunch of medication. So Clearly, that's an epigenetic reset. Clearly, that simple little hack of drinking a bunch of water in the morning to imitate what a migratory human would have been doing most of the time seems to trigger a whole bunch of clearance around your epigenetic system, because now your liver can get rid of those toxins. And one of the biggest interferences and irritants with respect to epigenetic function is toxins your liver can't clear and hormones your liver can't clear if it doesn't get that liver bath in the morning. So epigenetic reset number one, water. 2 liters a day, 1 liter in the first 2 hours if you can. Give yourself a few weeks before you can expect to be no peeing on a normal schedule, but this is fundamentally one of the smartest things you could do, literally. And it's free. And it's super easy to do. It just takes a bit of a reminder. And for me personally, I often take 2 500 ml little jars and I sit them on my counter, and then I fill them both up so that when I wake up in the morning, if I'm focused on this, I have a couple of hours to drink those 2 bits of water. And I always try and make sure that I don't drink a lot of water right before I eat or within about 20 to 30 minutes of just after having eaten. I don't think you have to be strict about that at every meal your entire life, but you don't want to dilute what your stomach's doing too much, especially for breakfast. Next thing would be to look at eating specific kinds of food. Now, I've got a video up on what we call the ancestral diet, or the ancestral autoimmune protocol diet. And I go into a lot more detail with this and the bigger why. So if you want to learn more about evolutionary patterning around nutrition specifically, check out that video. But one thing that we've learned in evolutionary nutrition or ancestral nutrition is if you go back far enough to when primates were sort of pre-proto-humans, one of the biggest evolutionary pressures was ice ages. And during ice ages, when there's no rain, there's no trees, primates don't have houses. Some primates naturally had to find another way to live, and some of our ancestors end up going to beaches and living off mussels and fish. So we're all aware, pretty much, I think, that if you eat a lot of really healthy fish oils and healthy fish, the anti-inflammatory benefit of those fats, EPA, DHA, with respect to your whole body and your gut and your brain, are just known to be profound. But in the sense of an epigenetic reset, imagine how many times our species has been pushed towards the ocean by ice ages. I think there's been 9 near extinction ice ages in the last 3 million years and a whole bunch of little ones. So every time we go through an ice age, or at least pretty early on in the evolution of our species, some of us ended up at the ocean living on raw fish. Now, when I say that, the first 3 things people say is, doesn't raw fish have parasites? Doesn't fish have a lot of mercury in it now? And what about Fukushima radiation? Those are all really valid concerns. Although having said that, if you're getting the right kind of fish from the right parts of the ocean, you're going to mitigate that possible harm. And it is a fact that if you're on a nutrient-dense diet and you are eating a lot of fish, the selenium content in the fish will compete with the receptors for mercury. So you don't have to worry about that too much. And there's really no absolute research one way or the other on how much radiation is in the kind of food fish we have, especially from higher up in the North Pacific or Atlantic. So not saying don't worry about any of these things, just saying that at this point, most of the testing done on our food supply of very northern deep cold water fish is not in any way something for us to panic about at this point. But I think it's something that we should be very mindful of. So if you want to protect yourself more, and I think this is just sort of a common sense thing, if you're going to go on a nutrient-dense diet and eat a lot of fish, especially raw fish, make sure you're also eating a lot of seaweed and things like that, because there's something in seaweed, and trying to eat as many different kinds as you can that can actually pull things like mercury and stabilize certain aspects of any kind of radiation from our food. And that gets all really technical, and there's a lot of arguments out there about what actually works with that. But anyway, the epigenetic reset is to imitate what our physiology would be like if we were one of those early humans, late primates that was spending ice ages at beaches eating lots of fish. And I've actually done this in my clinic with, I can't count how many people, who are having essential gastritis that's running their immune system and causing a lot of damage and obviously a lot of pain. And that whole vicious cycle can turn your immune system into that kind of more autoimmune monster where it's triggering all kinds of genetics and causing all kinds of problems, where it's triggering all those genes and causing potentially all those other problems. So it's an amazing thing for me as a person, as a patient, and as a doctor, that if I can put a person who's got a really, severe inflammatory thing going on in their gut, if we can give them something as simple as, say, a pound of raw fish as sashimi, which is fish that's been frozen, or ceviche, which is fish that's been cured in an acid like lime juice, now they're both safe in terms of parasites, but those healthy anti-inflammatory fats are still completely viable as molecules. So again, if you were to eat, say, a pound of raw fish a day for just 5 days, you're going to take your entire GI tract and reduce the inflammatory signaling. The image I often use when I'm talking to patients in the clinic is, if you're to stretch out your small intestine where most of this really happens, it would be the size of a tennis court. So imagine taking little sponges of anti-inflammatory fish that you've chewed up and swallowed, and now you're reducing all the inflammation and all the aggressive inflammatory signaling across a membrane that's the size of a tennis court, which is the front line of your immune system. So that's why it's such a powerful epigenetic reset, because not only is fish and or raw fish, seaweed and all these other things nutrient dense, they're medically considered to be anti-inflammatory, and the less you damage the fats by cooking, the more benefit you're going to get from that. And again, that's how we got here. There's research that suggests our high consumption of not only saturated fats from other animals, but from fish, had a lot to do with the growth of our brain. So if you want to know more about all that history stuff, watch the video on the ancestral autoimmune protocol diet, and hopefully that'll get you a bit more grounded in all of that theory and kind of practice. So since we're talking about the epigenetic resets that we discovered basically living at the beach, late primate, early humans, imagine just for a moment that you're getting really brave now. And you've decided to learn to swim not only a little bit out into the ocean, but a little bit farther. And now you've learned to dive down either with, say, a net bag where you can put stuff in and swim back to the top, or maybe a little spear where you can poke somebody and take it back to the top. Because there's a thing that you can do today, and I have a lot of my patients do this, where you go to a swimming pool. Obviously, you can't do this unless you really know what you're doing with swimming, but if you took a rock or a weight and just sort of threw it into the deep end or the middle deep end or even the shallow end of the pool, start where you're the most comfortable and obviously safe. And the job is for you to basically drop the weight, tread water, swim to the bottom of the pool, grab the weight, carry it up to the top of the water, and then drop it, tread water until you're ready and do it again. Now, that's just a really fun thing to do. It mimics the style of hunting most humans have done in the past and the present, say spearfishing and stuff like that, just no scuba tank. And it's an epigenetic reset in a really unique way. So again, if you're swimming and, say it's 10 feet, 20 feet down to get your rock or to get your fish, the period of time where you're exerting yourself against buoyancy and, a certain aspect of gravity to force yourself down 20 feet without breathing, and then to swim back up to the top, holding your breath, again, not breathing, is a pretty interesting thing to look at medically in the sense of how your body's biochemistry changes when you're under pretty extreme physical effort and you don't have the chance to use gas exchange or breathing. And that can do a whole bunch of really unique things with respect to deeper instinctual genetic drives. And they're really kind of complicated. But the one that's the easiest, I think, for most people to wrap their head around, and I guess there's a joke here, is when you're swimming without breathing and you're doing that kind of effort that intensely, you're going to upregulate something called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, inside your brain, that's actually going to allow most of your neurological system to kind of stabilize and repair itself. So for doing something as simply as just, treading water, diving down, picking something up, and coming up to the top at your local rec center pool could fundamentally shift a whole bunch of genetic behavior around certain detox and redox pathways within the body, again, as well as neurological health. And again, it's an epigenetic reset because it's based on something physiologically we used to do a lot of during our evolutionary past. And finally would be fasting. And there's a lot of different styles of fasting. A thing that's very popular right now with people is called intermittent fasting. I'm going to make a video specifically about that because I really want to make sure that the fundamental kind of science and terminology of intermittent fasting as a practice is clear. The kind of fasting that I would recommend people try to do with respect to an epigenetic reset would be to focus on trying a 3-day fast, say over a weekend, where you might have broth, or you could do like that master cleanse thing where there's a little bit of maple syrup, a little bit of cayenne, a little bit of lemon juice, just to stimulate some things while you're doing this. But ideally, broth or water would be the best way to do a fast. And it's only 3 days. And if you've never done any kind of fasting, I think 3 days is pretty safe. Again, if you've never done any fasting, you might want to connect with someone who can guide you through it, maybe ask you some questions to make sure your approach to the fast has the most, it's designed the most specifically around what's going on with you right now. Because, I mean, of course, I don't think anyone's going to just suddenly explode if they stop eating for 3 days, but if you're going to do something that's meant to be an epigenetic reset and you're trying to do it in the most accurate, medically specific way, again, you might want to talk to somebody who is pretty well educated around how fasting works. In the future, I'll probably also do a video that's just on that kind of a weekend fast. In the past, I've done, probably the longest fast I've ever done was 10 days. And it was a pretty incredible experience. So I'm still here. And the experience is just a profoundly beneficial thing. So again, when you're fasting, you're triggering a whole bunch of really deep changes in the body. One thing that's going to happen is the front line of your immune system is going to get to stabilize itself. And the front line of your immune system is basically your mucous membrane and most of your small intestine. So without having a lot of food and interference in there, there's nothing to alter your immune system's attempts to repair itself and reorganize itself. And most people say 3 days will effectively reset your whole immune system's sort of frontline activity. So that's clearly a bonus with epigenetics, because if your immune system is in a highly reactive state, sending all those highly reactive messaging molecules into the epigenetic soup, now your genes are that much more likely to react by expressing disease. Fasting is also a way to increase that BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So another secondary benefit. And I always like to make this kind of, I don't know, called a tongue-in-cheek little joke for people is, isn't it interesting that there's the two fundamental ways to increase that BDNF is either to be hungry, which means something's wrong and you better think out this problem or you're going to starve. Or if you're suddenly exerting yourself physically in a really intense and unique way, again, instinctually, your body's saying, oh my God, we've got to solve a pretty serious problem here. And it's kind of funny that those two situations, being hungry for days or having to work really hard, literally make you smarter. Because those are the two instinctual conditions in which humans had to solve problems pretty quick, or else we wouldn't have been going through that kind of a situation. So hope that gives you at least a sense of what epigenetic resets mean, what those 4 would be like. The fact that they're not in any way that big of, they're not asking you to move that far out of the territory of your normal life. We're just asking you to maybe drink more water and then maybe spend a weekend eating raw fish or ceviche or just, fish and avocados and lots of greens and seaweed, or trying various kinds of high intensity interval training, or that primal swimming where, again, you just tread water, go down, come back up, drop your weight and repeat. Or again, go into fasting. So any of those are basically the simplest ways you can reset a deep part of your physiology. So I hope you liked the video. I hope it gave you some inspiration to try out some new things. My name's Dr. Michael Smith. Please like and share the video if you like. And if you have subscribed, welcome to the fun team of what Integrative Health is up to. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because we're just going to keep coming up with really, really cool ways to help people sort out some of the kind of complex issues that we face in the modern world. If you have any questions you'd like to see answered on a video, just send me a comment through whatever social media you found this video on. Hope you're having a good day. And again, thanks for watching the video. Take care.